Sean todos bienvenidos al segundo conversatorio hacia los 100 años de la Escuela de Salud Pública de México, titulado Reflexiones sobre el futuro de la educación en salud pública, quien será coordinado por la doctora Laura Magaña Valladares. Estoy en representación del doctor Juan Rivera Domarco, quien precisamente en este momento está recibiendo su segunda dosis de vacuna contra COVID-19. Les envía a todos ustedes un afectuoso saludo y me comisionó para representarlo. Quiero agradecer la participación de tan relevantes panelistas, entre los que se encuentran la doctora Katarzyna Sabanowska, académica de la Universidad de Maastricht en Holanda, el doctor Ian Lapp, rector del Wentworth Institute of Technology Boston del estado de Massachusetts. Participa el doctor John Middleton de Londres, Inglaterra, quien es presidente de la Asociación de Escuelas de Salud Pública del continente europeo. Nuestra querida colaboradora de nuestro instituto, la doctora Tricia Pennycock, quien es vicedecana de Educación del Colegio de Salud Pública en la Universidad del Sur de la Florida. Participa también la doctora Mary Catherine Smith McNabb, quien es directora del A.T. Still University College of Graduate Health Studies. Y finalmente la doctora Julie Kornefeld, vicerrectora de programas académicos de la Universidad de Columbia en Nueva York. Muchas gracias a todos ustedes. Su generosa participación nos distingue. Antes de cederle la palabra, quiero referirme a la doctora Laura Magaña Valladares, quien es la presidenta y directora ejecutiva de la Asociación de Escuelas y Programas de Salud Pública de los Estados Unidos de América desde el año de 2017. Bajo el liderazgo de la doctora Magaña, esta asociación ha seguido avanzando en la misión de fortalecer la capacidad de los miembros mediante el liderazgo, la excelencia y la colaboración para la educación en salud pública. Durante el mandato de Laura, esta asociación ha incrementado significativamente su participación global, puso en marcha el Instituto de Liderazgo Académico de Salud Pública y ha incrementado su activismo y abogacía en los temas urgentes de salud pública. La doctora Magaña ha dedicado más de 35 años a liderar con éxito la transformación y el desarrollo de universidades públicas y privadas en México, organizaciones educativas en los Estados Unidos de América, programas de las Naciones Unidas y organizaciones no gubernamentales entre Centroamérica y Europa, entre otras. La doctora Laura Magaña Valladares fue la secretaria académica de la Escuela de Salud Pública de México del Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública durante 13 años. Durante su exitosa gestión en nuestra escuela, Laura logró los siguientes hitos. Se innovaron todos los programas académicos para hacerlos por competencias, centrados en el aprendizaje y utilizando tecnología educativa. Se iniciaron innovadores programas ejecutivos y virtuales en todos los grados académicos, especialidades, maestrías y doctorados. Con la gestión de Laura, se formalizó el diplomado de docencia para los profesores de la Escuela de Salud Pública de México. Se logró la acreditación internacional ante el CPH con todos los criterios cumplidos, siendo la Escuela de Salud Pública de México la primera institución internacional en lograr esta acreditación. Además, se fortalecieron los lazos con la comunidad académica global para el intercambio estudiantil y docente. Con Laura al frente de nuestra escuela, se reestructuraron los colegios académicos para el fortalecimiento de los mismos. Se creó un proyecto de acreditación que posicionó a la Escuela de Salud Pública de México entre las escuelas de salud pública de excelencia en el ámbito nacional e internacional. Se creó el Centro Virtual para desarrollar, operar y evaluar más de 200 cursos en línea anualmente. Y entre otros muchos méritos, Laura logró desarrollar la primera plataforma conocida por su acrónimo CLIMA para la salud en español, que a la fecha ha capacitado a poco más de 500,000 personas. Finalmente, Laura ha publicado más de 100 artículos científicos relacionados con entornos de aprendizaje, el uso de la tecnología en la educación y la educación en salud pública. También ha sido profesora y conferencista en diversas universidades alrededor del mundo y, por supuesto, en nuestra escuela nos distingue como docente en la Escuela de Salud Pública de México. Por las razones anteriormente expuestas, nos sentimos muy orgullosos de la doctora Laura Magaña, a quien cedo la palabra para coordinar el conversatorio Reflexiones sobre el futuro de la educación en salud pública. Muchas gracias, Laura, por tu atención.
Claro. Mil gracias, doctor Lascano, por sus generosísimas palabras e inmerecido reconocimiento. Buenas tardes a todos mis queridos colegas del Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública y toda la comunidad académica nacional e internacional que nos acompaña el día de hoy. Ha sido realmente para mí un gran privilegio pertenecer a esta reconocida y centenaria institución. Felicidades por 100 años de vida, a través de los cuales la Escuela de Salud Pública de México ha sido líder en la formación de recursos humanos, en la generación de conocimiento científico, en el diseño de la política pública nacional y global. El día de hoy estamos celebrando este acontecimiento con un panel de lujo. Tengo el gran gusto y honor de presentarles a líderes globales en salud pública, expertos en temas educativos, grandes colegas, amigas y amigos todos, para que juntos reflexionemos sobre el futuro de la educación en salud pública. Ciertamente, estamos frente a la gran oportunidad histórica de transformar e innovar nuestras escuelas y programas de salud pública. La pandemia ha sido sin duda una tragedia y nos duele el número de muertes evitables y tanto dolor ocasionado mundialmente. Pero frente a esta adversidad, se abre la oportunidad de oro para la salud pública. No solo porque se evidenció la importancia de nuestra profesión y el lugar fundamental que tiene en la sobrevivencia humana, sino nuestra influencia para mejorar la calidad de vida de todas nuestras poblaciones a través del papel vital como activistas de las causas que determinan la salud y la enfermedad, con la perspectiva de la equidad social y los derechos humanos que caracterizan a la salud pública. Como Roy Abernathy dijo, y cito, históricamente las pandemias han forzado a los humanos a romper con el pasado e imaginar un nuevo y mejor mundo. Cierro la cita. Así que aquí estamos para imaginar y trabajar para esa nueva realidad. Es por eso que hoy aportaremos a la discusión del futuro de la educación en salud pública desde tocando diversos puntos, diversos ángulos. Y para ello tenemos a este panel de lujo. Quiero empezar con la doctora Hacia Chabanowska. Hacia, y ahora voy a pasar a inglés, así que ya saben cómo pasarse en el Zoom, si es que así lo desean, a la interpretación. So, Hacia, thank you for being with us today. Can you share your insights about the future needs of the public health workforce? Let's start with that perspective. Thank you, and to you.
Thank you very much, and buenos tardes. I'm deeply honored to be invited and serve on this panel and participate in this academic feast. Thank you very much, Laura. And today I would like to talk about the needs of a public health workforce in relation to lifelong learning. And when I was thinking about this topic, I thought about several aspects. Bridging gaps, working differently means learning and leading differently, public health workforce professionalization, and lifelong learning. So I think this is something that we all experience when we think of working differently and leading differently, because we all experience a sudden and radical change. We experience social and physical isolation. We had to quickly, immediately shift to distance and online learning. and remote from home or restricted workplaces for a long period of time using digital media. And we realized that we need different skills, that more leadership qualities, empathy, flexibility, open and transparent communication, innovation, that we needed a new vision for public health in order to develop strong, resilient, and supported public health workforce. We also have seen that the crisis, the pandemic, has brought great complexity. And what do we need to learn in order to live with the complexity and deal with different aspects, health, environment, mental health, economic aspects, different intervention, crime and violence. So this is all interconnected and we all need to learn. But it is not enough if we just know how to learn and how to adapt and how to be lifelong learners. As public health workforce, we need a systemic approach, a structural approach from the governments, from the public health organizations, and from the educational institutions, that continuing professional development for public health workforce is something that is specifically targeting the public health workforce. So we need competencies, training, a formal organization, something like the medical chamber or nursing chamber, that will make sure that continuing education is targeting public health professionals and is answering their needs. We need the code of ethics and professional conduct for public health professionals. And these things can be achieved through the collaboration or through the government, through policies and regulations, taxonomies, planning and accreditation, also through public health organizations that work on the recruitment, job descriptions, and also possible education. And finally, us, the educational institutions that provide competence-based education and training, including continuous professional development. And in this way, we affect the development of both core and wider public health workforce. But doing this and adapting for the future, bridging the gaps, we need leadership, we need stakeholders, and we need to understand the changing context of public health. So how do we help public health professionals and workforce to train, retrain, and bridge the gaps to move from where we are now to the future, which always seems to be better, and how do we train and retrain? An example is one of the recent article about public health competencies through the COVID-19 pandemic. We have looked at the competency framework that is WHO ASPER competency framework we use in Europe for the schools of public health. Something similar that the association, American Association, also has these competency frameworks. They are used for assessment of professional skills and competencies, where professionals can find where they are now and where they want to be. However, the pandemic has shown that we need some new skills like flexibility, motivation, and above all, communication. On one hand, we need a blend of research analytical skills mixed with empathy, sensitivity to diversity, strong epidemiological skills, but also employability and adaptability to meet the needs of the current times. To be a lifelong learner, we also need to know how to bring science closer to the community. Perhaps at academia, we often are a lot theoretical. But since communication seems to be now a very important skill to influence the society, we need to think how to prepare our lifelong learners to bring science to the citizens. And above all, how to bridge. So public health lifelong learners and professionals need to know how to bridge. We always cross different bridges, from the educational organizations to the policymakers, from citizens to practitioners. And I think that this possibility and ability to bridge science, practice, and education is one of the skills that needs to be developed and included in the future for the lifelong learning of public health professionals. So I would say that public health professionals, lifelong learners, need to be adaptable. And in spite of the disruptive context, they need to be able to build and strategize the knowledge base and infrastructure for public health interventions. They need to be able to activate system-wide cross-sectoral networks, and they need to be able to deliver high-quality achievements in public health in spite of all the disruptions. They need to be interprofessional, interdisciplinary, resilient, and digital. And we, as public health educators, have to make sure that they grow. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you so much, Hacia, for these incredible insights. And I'm sure, I hope we have some time at the end. There's a lot here to discuss, but thank you for bringing the importance of resilience, of all these new cross-cutting competencies that are more in the domain of the human competencies like adaptability and resilience and being empathic. And how do we do that in our curriculum? And the importance of the topic in terms of the lifelong learning. So we are not relying now just in going to the university for 2 or 3 years and that's it. It has to be the perspective has to be a lifelong perspective. So thank you for your insights. Now we're going to hear from John. Hi, John, and thank you for being here with us. So, John, the pandemic, the climate change, the social injustice around the world has really shown us the need to train our students to become strong activists and advocates. So can you share with us how do you see this need and how to incorporate in our already busy curriculums or programs? And thank you for your insights in this conversation, John. So, John,
thank you. And thank you for inviting me today. It's great to be here to celebrate 100 years of Mexican excellence in public health. Thank you indeed. Health is global. There is no public health issue that a single country can tackle on its own. And we have to organize our public health services, our public health professionals, and our public health systems to be able to understand that global nature of public health and to work with countries all over the world to bring about better health for our communities and to protect and to improve that health. Now, pandemic has made it very obvious that health is global, but I'm going to start very briefly with some other position. Non-communicable disease. If you look at the global burden of disease project, the table diagrams show us that 2/3 of all deaths in the world, in rich or poor countries, are all due to non-communicable disease. And that study says further that 25% of those deaths are due to food-related and dietary conditions. And if you add in alcohol, that figure goes up to 4 in 10 deaths. Now, if you are of the persuasion that healthy eating campaigns and local intervention is going to change that, then you need to look at the Oxfam report showing that 10 companies around the world control most of what we eat. You know who they are: Kellogg's, Danone, Pepsi, Coca-Cola. All of these companies are major controllers of our behaviours, and we need to be able to regulate, we need to be able to tax and control and manage this incredible anti-health force that is out there. Many of you are familiar with the merchants of doubt, how the industries have learned from the tobacco industry, employed the scientists just to cast doubt on any evidence that comes forward saying that there should be more control over these desperately harmful substances and products that are produced. And we need to be able to combat that doubt. We need to be able to communicate better, when we need to be able to communicate risk to the public, and we need to be able to communicate with our leaders and our politicians to ensure these areas of anti-health are managed and controlled. There are other major areas of global ill health which impact right across the board. Conflict relates to migration. It causes incredible environmental damage as well as human damage and impacts that last for generations. One example was the Arab Spring, which may have arisen from climate change, from the loss of agricultural land, forcing farmers into the big cities in the Arab world, leading to the food riots, leading to the Arab Spring, leading to the desperate war in Syria and Libya, and creating this mass migration, which then in turn led to the rise of populist governments in Europe. So there is this incredible interconnection between environmental damage, climate change, commercial interests in health, and all these things need to be tackled by multinational and global intervention. On top of that, we can layer on the issues of misinformation, the global manipulation of data and information, which has impacts on elections, and more close to home, of course, has impacts on anti-vaccine campaigns and other impacts on campaigns of public health. So we need to look at, I think, public health in two ways. One is the health of the public, and that is everybody's business. We need to have a fully engaged public who understand, who are literate in health matters, and who want to be part of a health improving society, and we give them, they are the assets, we give them the tools by which to improve their own health. But then there is also the public health system, the service and the professionals, and we, if you like, are the grit in the oyster, or the catalyst for health improvement. And without a dedicated professional expert group, you won't actually be able to address the health problems that we see. But in that public health system, we need to recognise that public health is multidisciplinary. In a paper I wrote in 2016 called ISIS, Crop Failure and No Antibiotics, I described our need to involve economists, ecologists, climate scientists, but also political scientists, international lawyers, and even theologians. And now that list becomes even bigger, I think, in the context of the era of pandemic, in which if we don't properly address human ecology in relation to sea fishing, for instance, or the loss of forests, we are bringing humankind more and more in contact with pandemic-causing agents, and we will indeed see a century of pandemic. So in terms of what we need from our new generation of advocates, we need to see people who are extremely competent in partnership, people who can lead, but who recognise that others need to take the lead in different points of the argument, in different points of the problems. And we need to see people who are highly skilled in leadership, in communication, and in political awareness. I know I certainly haven't achieved that in my lifetime, but certainly we need to have that awareness and alertness. Technical issues can be managed, but we need advocacy, and we need a skilled and wide-ranging group of professionals joining us in trying to promote health and well-being. So I think I'll stop there, if I may, Laura. As I say, it's great to be with you today. I have got a slideshow which I'll share afterwards, but it was, I think, too long for today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for this insight, and thank you for reminding us that if we really going to envision the future of public health, has to be global. I mean, there's no way that we continue our silos just thinking about that our school and program, our region. I mean, the world is so interconnected that we are not safe until everybody is safe, right? So life has proven us that. So we need to work collaboratively with others in our region and globally. So definitely when all our talks about the future of education has to be always with the lens of global interconnectivity and all these, you're adding to the list of competencies which are more like in the communication and leadership and political awareness and advocacy, truly important for the future. So thank you, John, for that insight. We're going to move to Mary Catherine. So Mary Catherine, what do you think are the transformative educational models that we need to envision in our schools and programs in order to really deliver innovative, relevant, pertinent education? Thank you, Mary, and welcome to the talk.
Hola, muchas gracias por invitarme. Perdón, español no es mi primer idioma. México está muy cerca de mi corazón. Mi papá nació en la ciudad Acuña. Hoy voy a hablar sobre la futura de educación. Hi, I'm Mary Catherine McNatt. Mexico is very close to my heart. My father was born in La Ciudad Acuña. Today, I'm going to talk about transformative learning and teaching to advance academic institutions. So what we know is from learning modalities in education, we have our practicum experience and our integrated learning experience. We also know that applied learning is one of the best learning models for diverse student adult learners, meaning 18 and over. So we know those are important. So what is transformative learning and why is it important to the future of public health? It's not okay. All right, so the definition of transformative learning is the process of using a prior interpretation to construe a new or revised interpretation of the meaning of one's experience in order to guide a future action. So that can sound a little bit confusing. So basically, transformative learning distinguishes learners as receptacles versus learners who are actively engaged in the learning process and the critical reflection. What this means is learners who do the previous learning style is basically what we're used to is seeing discussions, papers, and sort of a passive learning style versus learners who actively experience learning and then reflect on that learning knowledge and then later apply it to current life experiences, past life experiences, and then foster it into their own knowledge acquisition. So what does this look like actually in a classroom? Well, it can basically be open-ended questions, reflections on things they've previously done, or interactive styles of learning. So this is sort of what it looks like in a diagram. The educational experience or the experiential knowledge is in the middle, surrounded by a cognitive presence, a social presence, and as well as the teaching presence. So the learner is very much more involved. The good thing about this type of learning, it can be done in the traditional classroom, the hybrid classroom, or online. As she mentioned previously, we need to be a lot more diverse and ready to be global, whether it be ready to transition to an online classroom, ready to be able to transition to the traditional brick and mortar, or with the pandemic, be flexible to where we can go online, offline, or a hybrid model. With transitional learning, it's sort of can go anywhere at any time. So what are some examples for the classroom? One of the things we've recently done in our program is our students, yes, they have the practicum experience and the integrated learning experience at the end, but what we've noticed and learned about this form of learning is the more experiences, the more actually applied learning they have throughout a program, the better are they prepared to be in the real world. And actually the better they are off in the actual practicum experience. So we have actually added experiential and transitional learning throughout the entire program. So at least every single course has actual applied and authentic assessments that the student learns and experiences, and then they actually have the practicum at the end. A good example is an outbreak scenario in epidemiology, where they go through and experience an outbreak or a pandemic, and then they have the de-escalation exercise in the form of a discussion. What went right, what went wrong, what could they do differently? Similarly, in the pandemic preparedness course, we have a whole emergency preparedness course. They do a tabletop exercise. That's an actual real tabletop exercise that a local health department does. And then they have an after action report. Each student represents a stakeholder group, and then they do the after action / hot wash report as the reflection. In the health policy course, you could do a public health policy debate. Each group you break the students into a group, they each represent a side, and then they can reflect on it and report sides, or you can have them switch groups and report sides. In the global health course, they can do an immersion experience. In epidemiology, we also have them do contact tracing phone calls, and we throw in a lot of cultural and different types of diverse experiences. What if they are migrants, or they're homeless, or they don't speak the language, or they don't want to tell you where they are, for different types, because they're afraid of deportation. Real life situations, so that they're not experiencing these things out in the field for the very first time, but rather they have these experiences in the classroom without the actual real life consequences. So why is this important for students? Well, it fosters critical thought, because they're not just reading about it in a textbook, but they're actually going through these real life situations in school. And they say experience is the best form of education, because now they are able to see the consequences of their actions without having the real life consequences. If, for example, students could have seen, well, we know a lot of them did, what could have happened if they made X decision during a pandemic response versus Y decision, what would they have done differently? It also challenges the mind. A lot of times somebody needs to see the consequences of their actions to challenge their mind to make a different decision. It allows them to do that without the real life consequences of impacting a whole community. And through that, they're able to experience more critical thought. We know these current generations raised with computers and laptops and desktops and copy and paste have a hard time developing these critical thoughts. So this type of learning enhances critical development and cognitive development and critical thought. As they say, experience is not the best teacher, evaluated experience is. After the experiential learning, it's the most important part of this type of learning is evaluating and reflecting on that experience so that you know how to change those choices next time. And so why is this a future style of learning? Well, public health education, it's not just about book knowledge, it's about application, applying it to our target audiences, our cultures, immersion, experience, understanding who we're working with and why, and being able to relate and have that empathetic. So with the knowledge we have, the technology we have, being able to immerse yourself in a culture. Some of our students, even in our online program, haven't traveled outside of their own hometown. So it's really hard to be able to teach these students cultural competency and cultural understanding without traveling. But now we have these experiences and these tools that we can actually try to develop and teach them that. So it's almost negligent to just teach them book knowledge. And so with all these new forms, it's better to teach them these experiences and have these education. Ma'am? And so that's why to us, this is the future of education and public health. Thank you. Oh, I think we lost Dr. Magaña.
Doctora Laura, tiene la palabra.
Yo puedo seguir mientras se conecta.
Por
¿Sí?
favor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ok. Buenas tardes a todos. Les agradezco muchísimo la invitación al doctor Rivera, al doctor Lascano y a la doctora Magaña por poder acompañarlos esta tarde aquí. Doctora, ¿ya está? Ya está entrando la doctora Magaña.
I'm so sorry.
No se preocupe.
Something happened here. Weird. Thank you. Sorry, Maria, I didn't catch your last one, but thank you so much for this. You know, it was great that you actually walk us through very specific and practical examples. So thank you, and I'll be back with that. So Tricia is next. So Tricia, now more than ever, is really evident that public health has a fundamental role in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So can you speak to that, please?
Yes, I can. Hola a todos nuevamente, buenas tardes. Voy a compartir mi pantalla. Estaba agradeciendo al liderazgo del Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública y a la doctora Magaña por esta oportunidad de acompañarlos en esta tarde, y voy a conversar un poco con ustedes sobre la necesidad de enfocarnos en la diversidad, la equidad en la inclusión y la inclusión dentro del marco de este segundo conversatorio hacia los 100 años de la Escuela de Salud Pública. Y déjenme ver, aquí estamos, muy bien. Este gráfico, o uno muy parecido a este, es muy conocido, donde vemos a 3 diferentes personas tratando de, en este caso, ver un partido de béisbol. El lado donde dice el de la izquierda, la igualdad, todos tienen una cajita del mismo tamaño. Cuando vemos el centro, vemos la equidad, donde decimos que le damos a cada uno lo que necesita para poder tener el mismo acceso a poder ver, en este caso, el partido de béisbol, el juego de béisbol. Pero la realidad es que los que tienen mucho, tienen bastante, ya ni los vemos de lo alto que están. Y los que no tienen nada, ni siquiera se aproximan a poder ver el juego de béisbol. Entonces, la idea es que debemos de movilizarnos más desde el lado de igualdad hacia la equidad, definitivamente, para poder alejarnos de la realidad. Pero en esta ocasión quiero desafiarlos un poquito a pensar un poco más allá de eso, especialmente en la educación en salud pública, siendo que tenemos la responsabilidad de formar no solo a los dirigentes de salud pública de nuestro país, del mundo, sino a la población en general. Estamos viviendo en un momento crítico. Al ver lo que está pasando con la pandemia y quiénes son los que más han sufrido, ver que la población no ha escuchado cuando se le ha pedido, por ejemplo, que se quede en casa, que use su cubrebocas, que guarde su sana distancia, y una ausencia de liderazgo efectivo. Entonces, al tratar de nosotros formar a los profesionales de hoy y de mañana, tenemos que tomar en cuenta cuáles son las cosas que tenemos que incluir no solo en el currículum, sino en la experiencia de aprendizaje, para que ellos puedan tener un liderazgo efectivo y puedan enfrentar crisis como la que estamos viviendo hoy en día. Entonces, si vamos a definir la equidad, podemos decir que es llegar a un mejor estado de salud, una mayor equidad en la salud, cuando hayan oportunidades para que todos puedan alcanzar el grado más alto posible de salud y llevar una vida digna. Y hemos estado utilizando mucho el término determinantes sociales de la salud. Y hemos escuchado cada vez más personas fuera de salud pública utilizando esta idea de los determinantes sociales de la salud. Y yo quisiera, basado en cierta literatura, poder ampliarnos un poquito esa idea de qué son los determinantes y especialmente cómo enseñarlos, cómo experimentarlos en la escuela bajo este contexto de diversidad e inclusión y equidad. Entonces, al enseñar los determinantes sociales de salud, no es solo enseñarlos como información. Nivel socioeconómico, educación, todos los lugares donde las personas viven, trabajan, juegan, sino como condiciones que deben ser cambiadas. Hay una diferencia entre pensar en los determinantes sociales de salud como que ni modos, así son las cosas y solo las describimos, a mover al alumno, al futuro profesional, a pensar en que así son las cosas, pero deben ser cambiadas. El siguiente paso es la conciencia crítica, llegar al momento en que el alumno, en que nosotros mismos como sus modelos podemos ver cuál es nuestro rol en cambiar estos determinantes y recentralizar esta idea de determinantes sociales de salud a la idea de equidad y justicia social. Y voy a hablar un poco más de ese término de justicia social en un ratito. Tal vez la parte más importante de esto es que cuando estamos pensando en la inclusión de diversidad, inclusión nuevamente y equidad en nuestro currículo, podemos tener la tentación de hacer modificaciones curriculares menores. Simplemente decir, vamos a añadir tal curso, vamos a dar tal clase, vamos a dar tal seminario, sin darnos cuenta de la importancia que existe en que haya una transformación estructural y cultural de todo lo que significa la educación en salud pública. Y por eso coloqué aquí en esta diapositiva la idea de que no se puede tapar el sol con un dedo. Todavía hay personas en nuestro medio, aún en el área académica, en el área de cuidados de servicios de salud, que piensan que no hay ningún problema, que los servicios de salud que existen son lo suficientemente capaces de poder recibir a cualquier persona de la población, que todos tienen el mismo acceso, que las personas que no tienen cierto acceso es por su propia responsabilidad, porque ellos han escogido cierto estilo de vida, vivir en cierto lugar, no tener ciertas conductas que son buenas para su salud. Entonces, todo eso no ayuda a que podamos mejorar la situación en que estamos. Entonces, al pensar ahora en los determinantes sociales dentro del marco de equidad en salud, no es solo lo que son, sino cómo llegaron a existir. Y muchas veces, especialmente lo que se está enfocando ahora en la educación en Estados Unidos, es este concepto de que el racismo sistémico y estructural ha servido como plataforma para todos los otros problemas que estamos sufriendo hoy. Que el hecho de que algunas personas no tengan el nivel socioeconómico adecuado, que no hayan podido disfrutar de la educación, que no puedan vivir en un lugar saludable, está fundamentado en decisiones estructurales que se hicieron desde el principio de cómo se ideó, cómo iba a funcionar este país. Y ese no es un problema solo de Estados Unidos, también sucede en nuestros países latinoamericanos. Entonces, la idea es que hablemos con nuestros alumnos no solo de cuáles son estos problemas, sino cómo llegaron a existir, quién se beneficia y quién sufre cuando vemos el esquema como está ahorita, qué se debe de hacer, cómo se debe hacer y quiénes son los responsables, en este caso ellos, para que nosotros todos, para que nuevamente pasemos de la observación a la acción. Tenemos a veces la tentación de pensar que el carácter económico es el único donde se manifiesta la disparidad y no es así. Y si solo medimos desigualdades en medidas estándar como tasas de mortalidad, uso de servicios de salud sin pensar en satisfacción, una mentora mía, la doctora Sáenz, que dice que no es solo la calidad, sino la calidez en la atención de los servicios de salud. Estamos perdiendo oportunidades maravillosas para mejorar cómo la población tiene acceso a nuestros servicios de salud. Porque cada población puede tener una diferente percepción de qué es salud y nosotros debemos de conocer esas percepciones para poder actuar de una manera responsable. Tenemos que pensar en políticas transaccionales, en intervenciones apropiadas para que entonces podamos hacer una diferencia. Quiero terminar mostrándoles rápidamente el modelo de lo que estamos haciendo en la Universidad del Sur de la Florida, donde trabajo yo, donde decidimos integrar al modelo del Plan Maestro Académico una estrategia comprensiva para dar respuesta al racismo sistémico. Entonces, pensando en el aprendiz como el centro de todo el modelo, sea ese aprendiz el estudiante, sea el personal docente para su desarrollo o los que están trabajando ya en salud pública y el público en general, ¿cuáles son las diferentes áreas que debemos de tomar en cuenta para poder integrar de una manera comprensiva esta idea de equidad y antirracismo en la educación? Entonces, todo desde la enseñanza, sus metodologías y tecnologías, los programas que enseñamos, el contenido, los valores, dónde pueden hacer su práctica profesional, quiénes son sus mentores, el tipo de investigación a la que le damos prioridad y la participación de alumnos en esa investigación, el tipo de aliados que tenemos en la comunidad, los espacios donde enseñamos y pensar también en lo que se ve, nuestros sitios web, el apoyo de todo el personal, todo esto integrado debe ser una manera en que nosotros podemos visualizar cómo poder enseñar de una manera comprensiva, no solo por el currículum, sino también por el modelaje, la experiencia de cada alumno, la importancia de la diversidad, la equidad y la inclusión. Para terminar entonces este último, hablamos de igualdad, hablamos de equidad. Nosotros lo que queremos hacer es llegar a la justicia, donde eliminamos la barrera. Ya no necesitamos darle a nadie un banquito, porque hemos eliminado las barreras que llevan a que haya inequidad en los servicios de salud y en la salud de nuestros países en general. Muchas gracias.
Excelente presentación, Tricia. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much, because this is such an important topic right now globally, that we really need to integrate it into the curriculum. Now that we're trying to figure out in terms of the future and the new world, we really need to emphasize the importance of this. And I know that this is in the heart of public health. We have always been concerned about this, but I think that in the future, in terms of education, we need to make sure everything is integrated with all this social view. So thank you so much for these important reflections, Tricia. So now we have Ian. Ian, undergraduate education has dramatically grown in the last decades. So how do you see this impacting academic public health? Thank you, Ian.
Well, thank you, Dr. Magaña. I'm honored to be here, and congratulations on the 100-year anniversary. It's hard to believe it's been more than a dozen years since I first visited Cuernavaca and got to see you in your home institution. The School of Public Health in Mexico has left such a lasting impression on me. In particular, INSP has affirmed to me the immense possibilities for public health education, research, and scholarship to transform the health of a nation. So again, congratulations. I do want to also note that this spring marks 20 years since I joined academic public health. And I want to just use my time as almost a bookends to think about the issues for which, Laura, you've asked. In that I joined Columbia University in June of 2001, some 3 months before 9/11 happened in the United States, and the anthrax scares, and in many ways in the US, put public health on the map in very similar ways to what we've been experiencing over the last year, but in this case at a global level. I'm also struck, and Tricia and I were speaking to this earlier in a private conversation, at how much public health has changed in terms of its growth. When I entered in 2001, there were 30 accredited schools of public health. And 15 years later, when I transitioned to a liberal arts and business institution, there were nearly 60 schools of public health. The Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health, for which Laura heads, has over 70,000 public health students in its member organizations. Quite remarkable. I want to answer your question, Laura, by a value that I've been advocating for in my current institution, Wentworth Institute of Technology, which is a STEM institution, a science, technology, and math institution. That I would argue that our graduates are our greatest contribution to changing the world. And therefore, we need a new model of undergraduate learning that enables students to understand the complex world around them and that allows them to transcend it. I see academic public health now more than ever as that platform for understanding people and populations. And positioned at the crossroads of universities across North America, undergraduate public health education can be that opportunity to both create informed citizens, but also change agents. And with the overall goal for a more just and healthier world. From Mexico to the United States to Canada, across North America, and of course, around the world, we need this new model. And may the next 20 years be even more impactful for undergraduate public health. And I hope that we can lead this change together. As I listened intently to the other panelists, I'm struck by Hacia's lifelong learning model. And if we can think of undergraduate public health as setting that journey in public health education for a lifetime. And why, again, bring undergraduate and public health education together is quite central. John's comments on preventable disease and the anti-health forces is again why we need public health undergraduate education to create, as he notes, a health improvement society. Mary Catherine's example of experiential learning and the need for authentic learning, I think that is, quite critical to us thinking about how public health can not only change lives, improve lives, but that we also need to change learning to accomplish those goals. Tricia's visualization of equity is central to both what we need to teach students, but how we teach students, how we mentor students, how we support students to achieve degree completion at the undergraduate level, and for us to achieve the type of justice that she spoke to at the end of her presentation. So I'd like to posit for all of you what I'll argue is 8 essential values for undergraduate education and its intertwined nature in the infusion of academic public health into it. What I think is just so exciting and why public health should be a central component of all undergraduate education is because academic public health teaches complex problem solving, sense making, scenario and systems thinking, imagining and building a better world. It teaches students to be persuasive multimodal communicators, to develop cross-cultural competency, to develop financial acumen, action-oriented, and most importantly, it creates empathetic leadership. If you look back in the history of the thinking about academic public health undergraduate, you think back to a real seminal article in 1987 by Fraser, Epidemiology as a Liberal Art. It makes the argument that epidemiology is far more than just a method. It teaches students deductive reasoning, and it provides a method for new ways to look at problems. And as we see, whether we look at the challenges beyond health in Mexico or in the United States or elsewhere, developing that mindset, that public health mindset in undergraduates, I think is so critical. And why I think the Institute of Medicine's call for undergraduate access to education and public health at the turn of the 21st century is as relevant today as it was then. I would argue that the rapid growth of public health education in the 21st century, in particular, as Laura notes, over the last decade, is of critical importance. It was only a decade ago that Riegelman and Albertine argued that public health is here to stay. It was a little bit more than 10 years ago that Donna Peterson brought us all together in Chicago to talk about the potential. And as we've seen now in 2021, undergraduate public health education is indeed here to stay. Where does public health education go from here? I think that, at least in the United States, but I think it's relevant in Mexico and across the world, it allows a public health framework to teach about the issues around inequality. So as the United States, has its reckoning with racial justice, and particularly this week with the decision of the jury in Minneapolis, that indeed racism is part of that public health crisis. And if we can teach every undergraduate about systemic cures to address police brutality and economic disparity, housing discrimination, and education, if we can teach every undergraduate about the social determinants of health, the impact not only on physical health, but mental health as well, I think it becomes incredibly exciting. So I see the future of undergraduate education, whether you be at an institution like mine focused on STEM areas, such as engineering and architecture, computing, that the future of undergraduate education and the future of academic public health are intertwined. Together, we can study the context for change, explore the opportunities for innovation, and make it happen. Thank you so much, Laura, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ian, for very remarkable thoughts about, I think that you opened the door to thinking about academic public health, not just toward just the graduate level, which all our schools and programs are really devoted to, but actually the whole pathway. Because right now, undergraduate education, especially in the United States and in other countries, have really grown so much. And we're very happy about this growth, because that means that in some countries, people that have that background in public health, then they're going to become the engineers and the architects and the nutritionists and the people that we want with public health background. But in some other countries, like in Latin American countries, that they're just starting, that we have some undergraduate education, but not that much. I think that we need to start thinking about community colleges and also undergraduate education, and then graduate education and lifelong learning, as Hacia was saying. So it's a complete pathway. So when we think about the future of education, it's not the MPH, it's not just the Master of Public Health, it's actually the whole pathway. And as you also will remind us, that even we want all the citizens to be really knowledgeable about some basic and fundamental of public health. So how about public health in K to 12, like the primary schools and the high schools, and what is the content that we're going to be, providing there, and then of course all the continuum. But we better plan together, because what we don't want to do is just to keep on thinking about just graduate education without thinking that there are some other undergraduates or high schools that are starting to work in public health. So if we start communicating and thinking and planning together the whole pathway, I think that's the better way to approach the future. So thank you so much. And it really strikes me how all of you have talked about the cross-cutting competence, more than like the human competencies that we need. So it's going to be awesome to later on in the discussion maybe touch about and that. And I just want to remind the audience before we go to with Julie that you can please put your questions in the Q&A bottom here in Zoom. Okay, Julie, so now we have Julie, our next and last participant. So Julie, public health is in nature intersectorial and interprofessional. But in academic public health, we don't talk too much about it. And actually, we don't teach in this way either. So I would like to hear your insights in this issue. To you, Julie.
Sure, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here, and really excited to end this conversation, or at least be the last speaker. And I hope that everybody spoke. I think you're absolutely right, Laura, that there's a lot of commonality across the things that we've spoken about. And I think I'll hopefully build on that. And, I'll start by saying, I don't think I'll have to convince this audience about the importance of this topic. I think that, and certainly given this moment, as we've talked about, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of racial reckoning, the importance of collaborating across sectors has I think, never been more evident or more critical. And so I think there are many arguments for why intersectorial or cross-sector education is important, but I think for today, I'll highlight two, and I think they've been highlighted already in many ways. The complexity of public health problems and the global nature of them, as well as the social determinants that contribute to health, require broad systems-based approaches And to say that in another way, they require joint work across sectors to solve them. I think that's one. I think the other piece is the levers that affect change. So the interventions and the actions that we take to mitigate health problems often sit outside the public health sector. And the decision makers who control those levers, and I think we've seen this across Latin America, across the United States, across many countries, those decision makers very often sit outside of public health. So, you know, how do we address this? And how do we, if we want to improve and expand this cross-sector collaboration, I think we have to focus first on education. And I think we have to focus in two big areas. And Laura, I know you and I have spoken about this. One is, how do we train our public health students to work effectively across sectors? And I think the two is, how do we effectively train students and practitioners or professionals engaged in other sectors that are critical to public health? And how do we get them to understand the importance of their power as decision makers and leaders in other areas, and the control that they have over the levers and their importance in public health? So I think on the first point about training public health professionals, I'll talk a little bit about my own experience. I teach a required course at the Mailman School of Public Health in our core curriculum. It's a small discussion-based course. We focus on case studies in public health, and the aim is really to immerse students in the complexity of public health decision-making and debate. In that class, and I'll simplify because we all know that we're training our students to do many cross-cutting competencies, but I'll simplify. I'm really trying to do two things. I want to expand our students' understanding of what creates health, and conversely, what contributes to poor health. And I want to strip them of their belief that we in public health have all the solutions. And that's challenging, because they come to a school of public health waiting for us to give them all the solutions. And they look to the faculty members in those schools as experts and global leaders as they are, and they want them to have all the answers. But they need to understand that those answers lie outside of public health very often, and that they need to understand that their skill set needs to be broader to support this multi-sector or cross-sector approach in their solutions, and that they have to address social, political, economic factors, all the kinds of things that the previous speakers have spoken. So how do we do that? You know, I think, again, in this class, we try and give them space and opportunities to practice engagement across sectors. And we need to give them skills to influence key stakeholders. So in my class, during the course of the year, it's a year-long course, we have them write an op-ed. We have them write a policy memo. And this is really so that they understand, how do we use persuasive writing to gain an audience that's outside of the walls of our own building in public health, or outside of our Zoom screen in the case of this year. And then we also make them wear stakeholder hats very often in the discussions that we do. And I will tell you that the students, this is their favorite part. And when we do post-year reflections, they talk about this. And part of that is because what we force them to do is wear the hat of an organization or a leader in an organization that's outside of the public health sector, that is thinking differently, that has different core values, that has different missions and different aims in accomplishing public health outcomes, and or maybe the same outcomes but coming at it from different means. And it really challenges them to question their own values and beliefs, and to think differently, and to think about how they have to engage in those conversations outside of class when they're going to be encountering people who have different values. So these are some of the specific examples, but more broadly, and I think some of my peers already have mentioned this, but we need skills that help them to learn how to align motivations and values, to manage conflict and negotiate solutions, to find common language. I promise you that in all sectors across the country and the world, nobody knew what herd immunity was a year ago. We all know that now. But we have to speak a common language, and we have to be able to translate our public health terms into terms that are meaningful to people outside of our own health sector. We have to have people build teams across sectors. We have to develop trust. And this is a hard one I think we've all struggled with this year. And we have to be able to give our students the skills to translate science and data and results in a way that people understand who don't participate in a daily way in our sector. It's a tall order for academic public health, because we also want to deeply train them in the discipline. And particularly now, being experts in public health is so important, but they need more. So and this is a question Laura and I have talked about, and many of us have talked about, so how do we do that? How do we effectively engage our students? And then how do we effectively engage students outside of those sectors? I can tell you, to try and engage those outside of the sector, what it's not giving everybody an MPH, because we can't do that, right? We can't give everybody it. So if there's good news, and I think, Laura, you've already said this, if there's good news that comes out of this pandemic, I think it relates very much to this topic. I don't think there's any sector, from transportation to agriculture, that does not think they need to know and understand public health better now than ever. This is a huge opportunity for us, right? I think academic public health has been thinking about this for some time, but we really have to seize this moment. What do when other sectors see the value of public health, right? They get it now. And I think also we have people coming out of this pandemic who need new skills. They want to re-enter the workforce in different ways. So how do we capture them, and how do we engage them? So we need to think about what other kinds of education, short courses, micro-credentials, certificates that we will be able to enable and engage people across sectors in ways that meaningfully contribute to this. And we have to focus both on how we deliver that and the what. What is it that people need to know? They don't need to know what our students know in 2 years with an MPH, but what is it that we feel that they need to know? So I'm going to stop talking and close there, but I will close going back to my own class example as I was thinking about this in this context of intersectorial or cross-sector work. What if my class that I described to you was not required just of MPH students? But what if at Columbia it was required of students enrolled in the business school, the law school, the engineering school, the journalism school? What if they had to find together common definitions, common values, and use that to design cross-sector solutions? What would the world look like? I think it would look better. And that's where we need to go.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you so much, Julie. So you see, I'm going to go back to the Spanish just to tell a la audiencia que vean el panel de expertos que tenemos, de verdad, reflexiones muy interesantes. Tenemos muchos abordajes acá, muchas cosas que podemos discutir. Pero la idea justo de este webinar es realmente poder simplemente traer ideas para continuar el diálogo entre nosotros. Antes de empezar, he estado revisando las preguntas que ustedes han mandado, y hay una importante que en varias ocasiones ustedes lo han mencionado, es el cómo. O sea, creo que todos ustedes han comentado la importancia de muchas competencias humanas, digamos así, ¿verdad? Ahora, ¿cómo metemos todo eso en nuestro currículum? Nuestro currículum que ya está totalmente desbordado de contenidos, ¿verdad? Pero son contenidos, es conocimiento, es ciencia ahí, importante, por supuesto, para nuestros alumnos. Pero ¿cómo le hacemos para poder meter, digamos, todos estos contenidos, todas estas competencias más humanas, más sociales, y cómo se enseñan? Me gustaría empezar con esta pregunta, y ojalá podamos abordar un par más que están aquí ya llegando en el chat. So, please, anyone, please jump in.
Si quiere, yo puedo empezar, y varias cosas vienen a la mente. En primer lugar, la parte práctica de la educación, ya sea en el salón como tipo ensayo, como varios compañeros panelistas han mencionado, pero especialmente sacándolos a nuestra comunidad. Algo que se ve muy frecuentemente es que las escuelas están en una torre de marfil y nunca llegan a tocar a la población que está alrededor. Y no es hasta que los alumnos trabajen con los maestros en las comunidades que van a poder aprender la parte de esas otras destrezas que van más allá del conocimiento, y que es lo que les va a dar las herramientas para poder ser exitosos y especialmente ayudar a la población a la que deben servir.
Any other comments?
I can follow. Laura?
Yeah, because maybe Hacia, this is Hacia?
Yes.
And I have a question here that relates to you. Maybe you can comment on that and just add that, because the question says, how can you link the knowledge with the practice side and extend those to the centers in the workforce? So do you have like examples of how can we link the schools to the work environment.
Okay, so I will start with also responding to the first question. How can we show these more empathic qualities? And I would say I would just give one example that my students this year, when we had to move very quickly to online, and they were totally separated from their friends and were so eager to meet with teachers and to talk, and they told me, just tell us something. Just tell us something. And it meant that they needed human interaction. And we should serve as coaches and as mentors, letting them speak and share and work in groups and collaborate together through leadership training and through emotional intelligence and through various types of leadership courses where they learn how to work together and how to include colleagues and not to leave anybody behind. And now how to link with practice. So maybe I can say on the example of my university, we have a very strong network with organizations, with the institutions that take students for practice. And we also involve them in the lectures, guest lectures, where the students learn how it is in specific places where they can work and develop the research for the master's thesis. So it is one of the possibilities. And then we also have to be careful that the programs are not very theoretical, but that we always have practical examples and that the students have cases that allow them to work on the problems that are really public health problems, wicked problems that they have to solve using interprofessional, interdisciplinary skills and analyzing the stakeholders, their power and interest, and how these influence the decisions that are made. And also how to deal with change and how to implement the new solutions against the adverse and disruptive situations. So this is something that I can share. I think it links with the competences that Julie was mentioning that were important at the end. Thank you.
I can answer that as well.
Sure.
As far as linking to the actual real world, we're an online program and we have some partnerships with a rural consortium of public health departments in rural Missouri. So what our students do in some of our programs, we have them develop actual health materials that the rural health departments need because they're understaffed and they need resources and materials. So they tell us what they need. And in the specific courses, the students will actually develop and they'll sign a waiver that yes, the health departments can use them. And we meet so often with the health departments and they'll tell us, okay, we don't need the printouts because of XYZ. We need Twitter messages or Facebook messages, or we need an electronic video that we can, that's less than 3 minutes that we can show in the waiting room or something that we can push out. And so we make sure it's topically approved and for which course, and we assign, tweak the assessment. And so the students will create items that the health departments can actually use. And this one's like 16, a consortium of 16 rural health departments. So then they get the content they need and the students get the real world practical experience of developing stuff that's actually going to be used where they get, to work with target audiences, messaging and things like that. And then we also have, like she said, actual, the practicum experiences. We've worked with, we had students work with, the Navajo contact tracing during COVID. So they're doing real world experiences and, the authentic assessments, but in line with actual applications.
Laura, I was going to add one comment to that in thinking about the my topic, which was the intersector. I think one challenge I think that academic public health schools can do differently too, is to think about these practice-based partnerships with work companies outside of the public health sector, so outside of the health sector. So embedding ourselves in legal organizations, in communication organizations, in places of law where people are looking at regulatory policies that have impact on health. So I think actually those kinds of real life experiences that allow them to apply their public health skills, but across sectors, is really important too as we go forward.
Thank you, Julie. I would another topic from the Q&A, Rory Vides said that mental health should be visualized as a common denominator of all education in public. And somebody mention or comment on?
We, in our emergency preparedness course, we added we kind of beefed up the module on mental health, specifically for first responders. We talk a little bit about mental health in some of our other courses, you know, when developing interventions and things like that, but we did make sure that we revamped it quite a bit specifically to the emergency preparedness and public health response sector, because that is a huge issue, especially right now where a lot of our public health professionals are facing burnout and, you know, just this year with the political climate that it was and the threats and things. So we did make sure that we added, you know, that mental health component to that and beefed it up quite a bit. And then it's, you know, as we go on with the courses, there is, you know, different areas have mental health components throughout them that are discussed.
Laura, can I just say, I mean, there's a huge amount of interest in public mental health in the UK, and it transcends all of the major problems that we're interested in, you know, physical health, obesity, physical activity, all these so-called lifestyle things. They're all rooted in a, you know, how our early years are determined. And you know, when you look at inequalities in health, they're deeply groomed in the adverse childhood experiences. And, you know, we need a much wider view of public mental health that is about positive attributes, how people self-esteem, how they are able to negotiate what they need without violence or without addictions, and clearly there's a growing body of work on neurobiology in the early years and in the womb, which suggests that, you know, there are early determinants of poor mental health, and they impact in later life in terms of diabetes and heart disease and a whole raft of things. So it's a hugely important area for us to develop and be aware of.
Thank you, John. There's another question related to the curriculum and the programs of the physicians. And it says that, how do you convince the schools of medicine that public health is important and the public health subject or the courses are important for the physicians and not just this boring course they need to take?
Laura, yo estudié medicina en México y salud pública también, y de verdad eran cursos de relleno, no había que darles mucha importancia, y cuando me invitaron a regresar a mi alma mater lo hice precisamente para poder contagiar a alumnos de medicina del amor por la salud pública. Entonces no lo vi en el tiempo que yo fui a la escuela, pero lo estoy viendo tanto en mis exalumnos, que cada vez más de ellos están viendo la importancia, están queriendo hacer una maestría, están redireccionando toda su carrera a pensar más en prevención, y con la pandemia ni se diga. Entonces yo creo que una manera práctica de hacerlo es invitando a más personas que tienen medicina y salud pública, las dos, a enseñar salud pública, que tristemente así es el gremio, ¿verdad? Entonces que si se invita a más médicos a enseñar salud pública en escuelas de medicina, y que ya que se les ha dicho que es un tópico no importante, en vez de hacerlo pesado y muy riguroso para que aparte de que es muy importante lo odien, hacerlo ameno. Hay suficientes casos, suficientes experiencias mediante las cuales se les pueden enseñar los principios teóricos de salud pública, sin que sea algo que aparte de que los maestros no les gusta, sea aburrido. Entonces, no saben cuántos mensajes he recibido este año de exalumnos que me dicen, ¿se acuerda cuando nos hizo leer sobre Lo estamos viendo hoy en día. Entonces, esa es una manera práctica de poder hacer el convencimiento. Tal vez no se va a poder con los directores y maestros actuales, pero sí con las generaciones de los que están saliendo.
Excelente. Gracias, Tricia, por esa contestación. Yo quisiera dedicar... Hacia. ¿Querías comentar algo, Hacia? Hacia, please, I'm sorry.
Yes, I would like to comment because public health has always been treated like a poor cousin of medicine. And I think it will never change because we need to do more. And I think that public health, as I showed in the model, needs to be recognized and accepted by the government. And there need to be specific policies and regulations that have impact on the educational programs, and that there is a self-government of public health where public health professionals, like medical doctors, like lawyers, have their own self-government which protects the entrance to the profession. And then public health will be better recognized and respected. So all these things that require the professionalization of our field will probably contribute to better recognition, and then medical doctors will be more interested in studying public health, specializing in public health, not only when the pandemic strikes.
Thank you, Hacia. In order to wrap up our seminar, and I'm sorry, but it's just so many topics that we can really continue with talking, and I'm sure we're going to have plenty of opportunities for the future. But can I just ask you, like, in less than 1 minute, each of you, what will be just your last comment if you are thought about what's the most important, what are one of the most important topics or areas that we really need to focus when we think about the future of education? What are the issues that we really need to come up? One comment, one idea. Julie, now let's start the opposite.
Oh no, I thought I get to go last. Gosh, one comment, one idea. I would say that we have to think outside of our own institutions and think more broadly. And who can we partner with and who can we collaborate with in order to ensure that the public health concepts and critical messages are part of the education and part of the collaboration that we have across sectors, because we won't solve these complex problems ourselves. And if we can't effectively engage with those outside of our sector, we will not effectively solve these problems.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah.
I would argue this is a public health moment. And I will maybe coin a phrase on the spot, we'll see if it catches up, but we need a pandemic pedagogy. That embodies that transformative learning that Mary Catherine spoke to Tricia's framework on equity and justice, to Julie's point about multi-sectoral, in a sense that when Mary Catherine talked about experiential and authentic learning, unfortunately, the entire world was our public health classroom here. And to differing degrees, everybody experienced this lesson. And I think more than when I pointed to 9/11, this is the public health moment where we can actually draw upon people's experiences, whether it be both physical health and mental health that we spoke to really address that medicine has not gotten us out of this pandemic. Public health has not gotten us out of this pandemic. Public and corporate has not gotten us out of there. And of course, government has not as well. So can we create a pandemic pedagogy to move ourselves forward, to better position, to Hacia's point, public health as a real change agent for society and the creation of greater social solidarity within and across nations.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jan. Tricia, one sentence.
Nuestros alumnos están demandando de nosotros que vayamos más profundamente sobre un estudio más serio de lo que hemos considerado como algo que ha sido paralelo a salud pública. Ellos quieren que hagamos más. Y esta es la oportunidad de que en el tema de diversidad, de inclusión, hagamos más. Y que no nada más le demos una pincelada, sino que con nuestros alumnos vayamos más profundamente porque ellos nos lo están pidiendo.
Thank you, Tricia. Mary.
I just think we need to keep thinking outside the box, collaborating, and bringing as many people into public health as we can with, our applied learning and new techniques.
Right. John. Thank you, Mary.
Well, we might talk thinking outside the box. I just think we need a very large box, there was a question in the Q&A about One Health, and we're all familiar, I think, with the climate change agenda, but we need to speak ecology, human ecology, and the animal world that we live in, we need to be able to not be experts in these things, but be able to speak enough of the language to get by.
Thank you, John. Hacia.
I'm the last one, so we know what to do. And we've heard that we have solutions for everything. And when pandemic strikes, we like talking about it. And the lesson is that we can't be like in the medieval times, what Boccaccio has described in Decameron, when the Florentines were hiding in the cave because of the pandemic, and they were telling stories. And when the pandemic was over, they came home as if nothing happens. Something has happened, and we have to learn.
Thank you all. Thank you for this. It was a great conversation. Thank you for all your insights. Gracias a toda la audiencia. De verdad, es poco el tiempo para seguir hablando de todos los temas importantísimos, pero seguramente seguiremos construyendo juntos el futuro de la salud pública que todos queremos. Gracias por su atención. Gracias, excelentes presentaciones. Gracias y felicidades, Escuela de Salud Pública de México, por sus 100 años de vida. Gracias, colegas.
Felicidades, gracias.
Gracias. Chao.